All right, welcome to another episode of the Cassels cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be Elie Deglaoui and Bruce Veliz to break down and preview the up and coming seasons for the Boston Celtics and Indiana Pacers. Should be a ton of fun, so let's just get into the episode. All right, joining me now to break down the Celtics and Pacers upcoming seasons are Elie Deglaoui and Bruce Veliz. How you boys doing today?
Good man, how you doing?
Doing great, Eamon. Once again, thank you so much for having us on. Excited to talk some basketball in, one of the drier parts of the season, but it's definitely going to be some fun breaking down these two teams.
Yeah, absolutely. We had to get this Celtics episode done finally. I know we're all Celtics fans. Had several pods together, but haven't discussed the Celtics just yet. But yeah, that's what we're gonna do. Yeah, first, sort of starting off with their offseason. They obviously saved a ton of money. The summer of savings was the big theme for the Celtics this summer. Got out of the second apron, saved over $300 million in luxury tax and salary payments. So yeah, overall, what did you think about? I guess we can just start with the big trades. What did you guys think about the value they got back for Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis?
I think the holiday trade honestly was a lot better than I anticipated. I remember going into it, a lot of people were kind of just talking about in order for the Celtics to unload Drew Holiday's contract, they're going to have to give up another asset, maybe draft capital, or I even saw some people suggest having to trade a guy like Payton Pritchard just to be able to get off that contract. But to be able to not only not give up anything in addition to Drew Holiday, but to also be able to get a really intriguing player in Anthony Simons, whether he's a long term piece or not, I think is as good of a trade as I could have asked for, given Holiday's, let's just call it what it is, injury concerns and his regression, let's call it. But he still provides value. And I think that's why being able to get a guy like Simons isn't as crazy as maybe it initially seemed. But all things considered, I'm happy with that return. And then the Porzingis one, I think the Drew Holiday trade kind of made me forget what a salary dump really looks like because we obviously didn't get anything of value, but Porzingis's value had, I think, never been lower than it was going into this offseason. And same kind of deal. The fact that we were able to just kind of trade him and not really have to give up any additional assets, I think, is kind of a win considering that it was all about just shedding as much salary as possible. So obviously, the value wasn't the highest that it could have been for either player, but can't really be too upset about the result.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I'm not really too disappointed in the results here for the Celtics. When talking about the Kristaps Porzingis trade, you mentioned it's a salary dump, and that's basically what they were trying to do. The only team that could really take on Kristaps Porzingis' salary was the Brooklyn Nets, and it was going to be a little bit weird for them to do that just one-for-one swap forward with the Nets positioning. So allowing them to do that flip for Georges Niang, but then also doing that flip then for R.J. Lewis to the Utah Jazz allows them to completely duck that tax and to give them some more flexibility, like you just brought up, Eamon, a little bit earlier. When referring to the Drew Holiday trade, I think the Celtics did better. They were supposed to get 2 second-round picks, then that was obviously revoked when the trade did go through, so a little bit worse on that end. But like we had mentioned, talking about where a lot of people speculated that Drew Holiday would have to have some draft capital attached to him or something like that with his older age. I think that the Celtics getting him for Anthony Simons, where a lot of people are very weird with an Anthony Simons fit, maybe which we'll get into a little bit later with like Payton Pritchard and stuff. But regardless, as a whole, I think Anthony Simons as a player and as a piece for the Boston Celtics is some good return value, even if it is used in the long term and it is used to flip down the line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys definitely nailed it. I was surprised they were able to get back a player of Simon's caliber, and then yeah, just like you guys said, really not having to move off of any assets or picks was a huge part of both these deals. Obviously, I think we saw them trade a couple second round picks. The Georges Niang salary dump that followed the Porzingis trade. So that's a little bit of a loss there, but at the same time, given Porzingis's value and the playoffs he was coming off of, I'm not too surprised, and it's just a win. You didn't have to give up like a first round pick or something like that. And then the Simons piece of the holiday trade, I really like, and I'm very intrigued by his fit. We can get into that in a second, but I thought just getting back a player of his caliber, significantly younger than Holiday, very talented offensive player. Defensively, hasn't been there throughout his career, but who knows? Maybe that will change in Boston. But yeah, what do you guys think of Simon's fit with this team? I know that's been a big talking point, and he's been involved in trade rumors pretty much since he arrived in Boston. But what do you guys think of his fit with this team, and then specifically with Pritchard? Because I think that's probably the most interesting piece of that, just given that they're pretty similar players.
think I kind of feel like my opinion on Anthony Simons, it kind of fits what the consensus is. Offensively, I think he could be in for a career year because he's a sharpshooter. And if Joe Mazzulla is still rocking with Mazzulla ball next season, even with the retooled roster, I think that could be a really good thing for a guy like Simons. But I mean, the elephant in the room is that he can't do a thing defensively, and it's not even entirely his fault. He just doesn't really have the frame to be a good perimeter defender or anything like that. And considering how important defense obviously is to this Celtics team, you can say what you want about their ability to knock down threes or their offensive versatility or whatever it was, but their defense was huge the last couple of years, and I think that's a big reason that they were as competitive as they were. And Simons isn't really a guy that can fit that. I think not that he's a lockdown defender, obviously, but I think you even look at a guy like Payton Pritchard. Like I trust Pritchard more defensively than I trust Simons because the effort is more there. He's a lot peskier. Like he can't like I don't trust him to guard Steph Curry 1-on-1, but he can at least make things a little bit difficult on other guards, and I feel like Simons can't really do that. And so I think that's why I'm kind of torn on his fit with Boston because I love what he could do offensively, and I think Celtics fans are quickly going to fall in love with him. But I think his defensive shortcomings aren't anything to just kind of gloss over. And so for that reason, I like his fit overall. I like what he brings, and he's still pretty young too. But I just don't see him being a long-term piece for the team.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think that this is probably one of the for where the Celtics were and what they had to do with, the salary cap and what teams they could really trade with and what pieces they could get back. I think Anthony Simons would be overall viewed as a positive piece, but I don't think it is the perfect fit for the Boston Celtics, and I don't think it is like exactly what they did need. Now, we could see that change a little bit depending on how Anthony Simons does play within the system. Elie mentioned how he's going to be very successful in this Joe Mazzulla offense with the three-point shot and his playmaking. I think we're going to see that rise. When Damian Lillard went down a couple seasons ago in Portland before Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe had really developed it or been there, a guy in Simons did take that leap. And even though people were crowning him to be maybe a little bit better than what he could be in the NBA, I still think that we could see that, very valuable offensive option for the Boston Celtics within this unit, specifically with Jason Tatum going down, with Jaylen Brown being more of a attack the rim focused type of guy. I feel like Anthony Simons out there on the perimeter for some catch and shoot opportunities like Derrick White and stuff like that is going to be very valuable for the Celtics team and how he's going to be able to kind of run this offense. But I would also have to agree with Elie where I think Payton Pritchard is a little bit more of a pesky guy, someone who's kind of fits that Celtics identity a little bit more than a guy in Anthony Simons. Now, we could obviously see that change with Joe Mazzulla being at the head coach. Maybe we do see a little bit of a revitalized defender in Simons, but I would trust Payton Pritchard to be a little bit more of a guy that is aggressive on that end. We've already seen him fight for those offensive rebounds for the Celtics in the past and, be a guy that can change his game not from just being a three-point shooter but also attacking at the rim. So I really like that. I think the one thing to note is with Jrue Holiday and Derrick White, they were really notorious for being great on offense and defense. With Simons and Derrick White, I think we're going to have to see Derrick White focus more on that defensive side, which we could see Anthony Simons be a little bit more of an offensive focal point within this Celtics unit when they play together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely agree with you guys. I mean, the player that Simons has shown to be is just a really high level offensive guy who can really score at all three levels. Capable passer as well, but really one of the league's worst defenders. I think he ranked in the first percentile in defensive estimated plus minus last year, which is really kind of a red flag. At the same time, I think I might be a little bit more optimistic on him at least becoming a little bit better defensively. I'm not saying that he's going to even be an average defender, but just improving a little bit on that end of the floor in a more competitive situation. When you look at him, it's not like he's 6'1", he's actually 6'3", and then he has a 6'9" wingspan. So I think the tools are kind of there for him at least to be somewhat serviceable, and I think just the dialogue about him being such a poor defender could really potentially motivate him, and just being in this Celtic system that really focuses on defense. I will say the Blazers did focus a lot on defense as well, so maybe I'm just being a little too optimistic. But at the same time, I think he could exceed our expectations a little bit defensively by just being not one of the worst defenders in the league and being at least somewhat serviceable. But at the same time, him and Pritchard are just such similar players in the sense of they're really microwave scorers who aren't necessarily the best defenders, even though Pritchard does play with a lot of effort and hustle, as Elie mentioned. So I just don't know how these two players are really going to coexist together this season and then long term. I don't think, personally, you guys feel free to disagree with me, but I don't think a trade's going to happen. At this point, I think if there was a trade, it would have already happened, considering how the Celtics have sort of been actively shopping him, and then going forward into the trade deadline, unless he really plays up his value significantly, I don't see a trade being there just because he is on an expiring deal. And I don't think people are going to sort of look at him as like this half-year rental and be super optimistic about that, even if he is playing at a high level. So I see him being on the team this year, and then we'll see next year as a free agent. But yeah, I think you just sort of have to see what you have there, and then potentially this fit could end up being better, or you end up re-signing him in 2026 and then sort of flipping him down the road. But yeah, what do you guys make of sort of the trade piece of Simon's fit? Do you guys see him possibly getting traded before the season or mid-season? What do you guys make of that?
I agree with your first part. I agree with you kind of your main point about if they were to trade him this offseason, they already would have done it. I do agree with that. I think I think the Celtics and Anthony Simons are in such a unique situation because Simons can play. And I think there is a lot to like about what he has to offer. And like I said, he's only, I think, 26. So like he still technically has room for improvement. And if the Celtics wanted him to be, he could be a long-term piece on the team. I don't know if that's ideal, but they have that option. I kind of like the idea that the first half of the season, and this is why I think if I had to guess he will be traded, is because like, around the trade deadline, because I kind of feel like maybe the first half of the year is going to be a little bit of an audition, see if he can improve defensively, see exactly what he can bring offensively, and just obviously Jason Tatum most likely will be out for all of next season, so they won't be able to see his fit next to a guy like Tatum. But they should still be able to get a good idea from him. And if they feel like he kind of fits the bill and he plays well enough, he should at least be able to earn another contract or a contract with the Celtics, a new deal. If not, I think they're okay with trading Simons at the deadline, even if it means they don't get a lot of value in return, because at that point, it probably makes more sense to just get rid of him while you can than just lose him for nothing in free agency, because he still has value. And I think unless he plays absolutely horrible to begin next season, that's not going to change. One situation that I kind of keep coming back to, it's not exactly the same deal, but I keep going back to when Golden State had D'Angelo Russell. I don't think it's the exact same deal, like the exact same situation, but they had a guy like D'Angelo Russell who didn't really fit alongside a guy like Stephen Curry. But while they kind of had their gap year, they auditioned him a little bit before ultimately trading him. I believe they traded him to Minnesota, or yeah, they traded him to Minnesota, I believe. So I think it could be kind of a similar situation there. I think Simons is going to be gone around the trade deadline, but kind of like you said, I don't think he's going to be gone before the season starts or anything.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys. I would say I don't think he's gone before the start of the season. I think we were able to see something come through, and I think he would have held a little bit more value than a guy in Georges Niang. So if something were to materialize, I think it would have already been done. But I do kind of fall in between on both of you guys on if he's going to be traded by the end of the season. Like Elie was saying, I do think that they could have him as like a tryout, as an audition, kind of to see what he could really bring out. And if they can get another piece that really fits their team, then they will. But if they can't, then I could see them holding on to him till next season and maybe trying to negotiate a deal with him on a like a team friendly contract. I know there are more teams that have free agency money next year compared to this year, but I do think that the Celtics, with having that space a little bit more open, could give Simons a little bit more of a comfortable contract. I don't know necessarily where that falls. I know he maybe could be seen kind of similar to a guy like Malik Monk, who's doesn't really have much trade value at around 25 million, and he's making 20 this year, so maybe not as much as that, but between like a 15 to 18 million dollar contract or something like that, I think it'd be pretty comfortable for the Celtics, and then that could present them to possible other moves within their guard rotation. Maybe if they feel like Derrick White's getting a little bit older, they want to move off of him, or maybe if they feel like if they want to get off of Payton Pritchard, they can have that little bit of free space to evaluate what they want to do with their guard rotation, so they don't lose Anthony Simons for nothing.
Yeah, for sure. I think you guys brought up some good points there, and I definitely like the D'Lo comp, and I can sort of see the
Hmm.
similarities there. A couple things that do make me a little bit optimistic that they'll be keeping Simons is I just don't really feel like that archetype is being valued a ton around the league right now, and I also feel like that's why you sort of have to re-sign him in free agency. Although, like Bruce said, more teams will have cap space. I don't see Simons demanding some massive contract to the point where the Celtics will be priced out of him. So I personally prefer to just retain the asset through the year, see what you have, and then possibly explore trades at the 2027 trade deadline. That's sort of my long term perspective. But I also can see why you guys or why other people might want to trade him sooner. And yeah, the fit isn't necessarily ideal, but I think you just got to sort of play it out for now. And the other thing is this Celtics team, their guard depth is really nothing to write home about. Obviously, you do have Pritchard, White, and Simons, but outside of those three, you really don't have anyone. So if you're trading Simons for a big potentially, which is another position you need for the Celtics, the guard depth would be really really thin, which is something that does concern me a little bit. But yeah, any closing thoughts on Simons before we sort of move on to the elephant in the room, which is the Celtics center rotation?
I think I kind of said my piece, said everything. I do want to make it clear I love Anthony Simons. Like I'm a big fan of his game. I just feel like specifically with the Celtics team, he probably isn't a long-term fit. I hope I'm wrong, so I like him a lot, but I just feel like objectively it doesn't really make too much sense to keep him around.
Yeah, just closing points here too. Like Elie just said, I feel like there were a lot more teams. I know the Magic were linked to him last couple of seasons. I feel like if they didn't go for Desmond Bane, that would have been a nice little fit too. I feel like there were just more options for him to just kind of fit like a glove compared to the Celtics. But I'm not mad, and I'm excited to see what that experience can bring out this season for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely agree with those points. Let's talk about this center rotation because it is a significant drop off. Obviously, when you trade Kristaps Porzingis, even though he struggled in the playoffs, you sort of knew that you're going to take a step back in that regard. And then I think many Celtics fans, I don't know where you guys land on this, but at least me personally, I thought they were going to be able to at least re-sign one of Al Horford or Luke Cornett. They end up losing both of them. Cornett to the Spurs very early on in free agency, first day, I believe, got a massive contract. After seeing the deal, it was obvious that was something the
Yeah.
Celtics financially just couldn't afford. And then Al Horford, it looks like he's signing with the Warriors. Nothing's official, but Brad Stevens openly said it's very unlikely that he returns. So pretty much you lost Al Horford. You just have to sort of chalk it up to that, even though he still doesn't have a home right now in August, which is just kind of crazy. Weird free agency. But yeah, regardless, they replaced those three centers, their main center rotation, with Luka Garza in free agency. And then Chris Boucher, following the Niang trade, they were able to sign him for a little bit more reinforcements there. And then Amari Williams as well. They drafted him in the second round, two-way player, so who knows how much he'll play, but he's another piece. What do you guys sort of make of the guys that they ended up signing? And then I think the other guy we have to talk about is Keita, just because he'll play a really essential role, likely taking on that starting center role. So yeah, how do you guys feel about
Yeah,
Keita and then the rest of the crew?
I was shocked that Luke Cornett left, by the way. Not so much after seeing his contract, like, oh, why didn't he resign? But I honestly thought kind of going like as the year progressed, I genuinely thought because we knew Porzingis was gone. Like we knew there was a very slim chance he was gonna resign. Or the Celtics were gonna retain him. But I kind of thought Luke Cornett was going to be the Porzingis replacement in a way. Like I thought he was going to be our next center, and obviously the team trusts him. So I genuinely was surprised that he left again, like you said, until we saw what that contract looked like. Horford, I'm not too shocked about. I'm firmly of the belief that if Tatum never went down, Horford would still be a Celtic. I firmly believe that. I feel like he doesn't want to leave, but you're not going to stay for a gap year. You want to win a championship, and any year could be his last. So that doesn't surprise me too much at this point, given the circumstances. I love Nemish Keita though. Like I'm not saying I love him to be like the next Shaq or anything, but I love Nemish Keita. I've been on the Nemish Keita bandwagon for a couple of years now. I love what that guy has to offer. He brings so much energy, and you can tell like the tools are there. You can tell he has what it takes to be a real NBA center. Do I love him starting? Not really, but I do kind of feel like if there's ever a time to give him an opportunity, it's next year where your expectations are low. You don't have a center, and they've gradually increased Nemish Keita's role across his last two seasons with the team, or his two seasons with the team. it kind of feels like this was inevitably going to happen, where he was going to have a bigger role. This might be a little bit bigger than they were anticipating, but I love Neemias Queta. I think I'm a big fan of the whole kind of put him out there and see what happens. So it's not great. I don't think Neemias Queta is going to be a starting center on a championship level team, but I like him a lot, and I love that he's going to be able to get that opportunity. And whether he's a center for the Celtics or more of a power forward, I also really like Chris Boucher. Again, I don't think he's a starting. Well, I don't think he's a starting center on a championship team. He technically was on a championship team, but I like Boucher a lot. I think one thing that's so underrated about his game is that he's actually improved as a 3-point shooter, and I feel like he is a solid fit with the Celtics team. Again, if those are your two best big man options, I don't think that's great, but I think they can make it work. I also do like Amari Williams a lot, but kind of like you said, Eamon, with him being on a 2-way contract, I can't imagine him playing too much. But again, I think the potential is there. I think he also has what it takes to be a solid big man in the league. I want to say that they're probably going to make another move before the offseason, but I kind of feel like it already would have happened at this point. So it's looking like it's going to be Queta and Boucher and some combination. But obviously, for a contending team, this isn't great. But given Boston's situation, I think there's potential for this to work.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by this big man rotation. I think that should be the one word that really hits home about this Boston Celtics season with all the injuries and kind of uncertainties with their losing of major players into this front court. You talked about Luke Cornett and talked about Al Horford. I'm under that personal belief and still was for a very long time that Horford was going to resign with the Celtics. But I agree with you, Elie, with Jason Tatum going down, it does make sense for him to kind of go elsewhere. I also expected Luke Cornett to be back and be that starting center, but then seeing that price tag, it obviously makes sense why he decided to go to San Antonio. But like you mentioned, with Neemias Queta, I'm very high on him. When the Celtics signed him over on Celtics Digest, I had a huge video that dropped. It went absolutely nuclear, and then I just started buying into Neemias Queta. Obviously, being Portuguese myself, I want to see that representation be represented out there in the NBA. He was the first one to get a standardized contract as a Portuguese player, and he's been able to prove that through these years. And last year we saw with Kristaps Porzingis at the start of the season, he was out, and we saw Luke Cornett get thrown into that starting rotation over in preseason. And to even start the season, we had Luke Cornett and Neemias Queta kind of switching spots, kind of depending on the matchup, and they both could hold their own. So I'm not going to say that obviously Neemias Queta is going to be this dominant impact center that's going to completely change the game, but he has those tools. If he slows down a little bit more, gets a little bit more comfortable, gets used to the speed of the NBA style, I think he can be a filler center for the Celtics team, specifically in this gap year. And over in Euro basketball this season, playing for Portugal, he's actually been pretty solid as well. So I'm very intrigued to see what he can kind of develop and to bring into this Celtics rotation. Chris Boucher, the latest signing for the Boston Celtics, I'm very intrigued in, and I like the ability for him to play the power forward and the center, because I feel like in this front court they don't have a lot of guys that can have that versatility. So having a guy like Chris Boucher to either run a little bit of a bigger, taller lineup of him at the power forward, where I think we'll see him a little bit more, or even a smaller lineup with him running at the center at some points, I think is going to be very, very interesting. And then Luka Garza, the first signing that they made, a little bit of a questionable one in my eyes, with the offensive prowess being still there, the defense a little bit lacking. We'll have to see where he can be really utilized. I think with adding Chris Boucher, with having Neemias Queta, it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable with the Luka Garza signing. I think he'll kind of be placed into that third center spot, similar to where he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves, but I do expect him to have more opportunities with this Boston Celtics team. Brad Stevens has said to like a guy in Luka Garza for the last couple of years, so maybe this is the spot where Brad Stevens, Joe Mazzulla can bring the best out of Luka Garza, similar how they did to Luke Cornett just a couple years ago.
I completely forgot about Luka Garza, so I think that kind of tells you my thoughts on him.
Mm-hmm.
I completely forgot he was even on the team, and I don't have super high hopes of him. Like, I think sure there's something there, but I don't think he's going to stick around for a long.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Boucher signing was really the saving grace for this center rotation.
Mm-hmm.
I recorded a podcast a few weeks before it, grading the Celtics offseason. I was really down in their big man rotation before they got him. Still obviously not great, but I think it saves them from being bottom 3 big man rotation to maybe bottom 7, bottom 5, whatever the case may be. But I do really like the versatility that he brings to the table. Like you said, Elie, he can shoot the 3 a little bit. He's developed in that regard. And then you can sort of run some double big lineups, which has been really a staple of the Celtics in the Joe Mazzulla era. So I think that's going to be huge. I think him next to Queta is intriguing, and then even him next to a guy like Garza potentially. Definitely intriguing there as well. Yeah, with Garza, I mean, it's really just the defense makes me really a little bit lower on him. He is talented offensively. I just don't know how he can hold up defensively. But when you have another guy like Boucher to pair with him potentially, that could maximize his minutes. But yeah, not super high hopes, and I am personally a little bit glad that he's going to slide into that third center role. Maybe even Xavier Tillman can take over for him. Who knows? I don't think any of us have super high hopes for Tillman either. But yeah, I mean, with Kada, I'm probably a little bit lower on him than you guys. I definitely like the sort of archetype that he falls under as this sort of rim runner and guy that can block shots at the rim. At the same time, I do think he's super raw, and being 26, I don't know how much more he has to develop. It's not like he's
Yeah.
23 and he has this raw skill set. I just don't know if like the hoops IQ is totally there for him. But the idea of him super nice, and we have seen it in flashes. So maybe in a bigger role, he'll be able to sort of maximize on that. I don't see how he went from playing around 13 minutes a game last season, if I'm not mistaken, and we're seeing so many mistakes, whether it's the offensive fouls, the defensive fouls. He should be a little bit more mobile than he is, but he does sort of get exposed on switches. Doesn't have the best hands. I just don't know if we're going to see that develop with more minutes necessarily, and I think we could see more of those mistakes potentially. But at the same time, as a guy that can set screens, is a rim runner, he's skilled at blocking shots, and he's a really solid rebounder as well. We could potentially see the best of his game, and really just the idea of him is exciting to me, but I am a little bit worried him being sort of that anchor to this defense, going from, a Porzingis, Horford, Cornet rotation to him being really thrown into that role in the middle does concern me. So yeah, with that sort of in mind, do you guys see the Celtics sort of being able to field a competent defense, or how much of a concern is that for you guys?
Bruce, you got any opinions? Because I don't know, man.
I've seen a lot of discussion about this. I think that the defense is definitely going to struggle a lot more than we have seen in the past. And like you mentioned, Elie, the Celtics have been like notoriously one of the top five, top three. Even when they won the championship, they were the best defense across the NBA. They've had these records over these last couple seasons, and it's been implemented with Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla, Ime Udoka at the helm to kind of have these top tier defenses. Now, losing Drew Holiday, losing Kristaps Porzingis, losing Al Horford, losing Luke Cornett, all those defensive X factors, and trying to replace them with, some filler guys. We'll get into them a little bit later, I presume, but guys like Jordan Walsh, Josh Minot to really fill in on that wing position with Jason Tatum going down, not really having that defensive stopper. I mean, you have Namish Keita, but not a true prime defensive stopper out there in the front court. I do think that they are going to struggle significantly defensively. Offensively, they're also going to be a little bit worse, I do think, without Jason Tatum, but hopefully with adding guys like Anthony Simons and Chris Boucher, they can supplement some of that three-point shooting volume and kind of work in this offense to be, a shell of itself to where they can hold their own a little bit. But I do think that the defense is definitely going to be a little bit weaker, and we're going to see that clearly come into play because even last season when Drew Holiday was injured, the Celtics were having some struggles with the defensive end. So I can't imagine a full season with them not having a guy in Drew Holiday. I feel like that's clearly going to show on their perimeter defense.
Yeah, I definitely think they're gonna regress. Obviously, I mean that's not really a hot take, but the part that I'm kind of trying to struggle with is they're obviously going to regress, but how much? Because you're replacing essentially Kristaps Porzingis, like we said, with Nemish Keita, who has solid defensive tools, but I don't think we can trust him, kind of like you guys said, to be an anchor. And then we're replacing Drew Holiday with either Payton Pritchard or Anthony Simons, and that's obviously a big drop off on its own. And we're not going to have Jason Tatum for probably the full season. So their defense is definitely going to be bad, but there's still potential there. I do like the idea of Jordan Walsh. I do like what Josh Minot brings. So I think they could still be an okay defensive team. And let's not forget, they still have Derrick White and Jaylen Brown, who, yeah, his defense has been kind of shaky over the last couple of years, but he can still, or has been kind of streaky, but he can obviously still provide a lot of value there. I don't think this is going to be a top five defense or anything like that, but I feel like they still can be an okay defensive team next year.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think you go from a starting lineup where you literally have nobody to attack to a starting lineup where you potentially have three guys to attack, and whoever starts between Simons or Pritchard, and then Hauser, he does hold up fairly well. I'm expecting him to be the starting power forward, but at the same time, you can definitely hunt him a little bit more than some of the other guys in the starting lineup from last year, especially going from Tatum to Hauser. There's no denying that's a big drop off. And then Kada, like I talked about, I think he's going to be put through a lot of actions. I think for this team, not being a bottom, I don't think there's a path for them to be above average. They were the fourth ranked defense last year. I think that's totally out of the question. I think anything above 15th is out of the question, but not being a bottom 7 or bottom 10 defense, I think would be a huge win for them. And I do think there's a real possibility that they are a bottom 5 defense, which if you look at the bottom 5 defenses from last year, none of them made the playoffs. I think that sort of sets you up for an uphill battle. So I do think that's going to be a really key factor in just how competitive this team will be. But at the same time, like you guys said, they still do have Derrick White and Jaylen Brown, who are two, in my opinion, all defensive caliber players and really elite defenders. So you still do have two really solid defenders in that regard. It's just the supporting cast around them, pretty concerning for me, and I think this could be something where we see them take a significant step back in. Offensively, I do think they have enough juice to maintain at least a above average offense. I don't think it's going to be top 5 like the past few years, but maybe could they even sneak into the top 10? I don't think that's entirely out of the picture. I'm expecting them to be at least slightly above average, especially just with the shooting that still remains on this team. I think that's an undeniable strength for them. But yeah, we sort of talked about some of the young players quite a bit. So let's really just talk about all of them at once. I mean, you guys can single out specific guys you want to talk about, obviously, but with Baylor Shireman, Jordan Walsh, I think those are the two big ones. We can also talk about the rookies, Ugo Gonzalez, Amari Williams, Max Shugla. The last two guys, who knows? They're two-way guys, so who knows how much they'll play. And then their other free agency addition, Josh Minot, is also worth discussing. So yeah, where do you guys want to start there?
I mean, I think the easy one is Shireman because I think Baylor Shireman showed, to me at least, he showed a lot of promise while also showing why he was almost a second round pick last year. I think the talent is obviously there, but his ceiling is naturally a lot lower than some of the other guys on the team just because he's already 23, 24, something like that. I mean, we saw it at times. Like he looks like he can be a real role player on this team. He plays with a lot of energy, plays with a lot of hustle. When he's hot, he's incredible. He could pass very well too. I think we all know the story of how he was a high school quarterback or whatever it was. So there's a lot to like about Shireman's game, but again, he's also very streaky, which is normal for a rookie going into his second year. But again, going back to his age, for him to already kind of be really almost in his prime already, despite only playing 1 year in the NBA, I think doesn't give me a lot of optimism about what his future holds. But I like the idea of Baylor Shireman, and I think with a full year to really have an expanded role with this team, assuming that he gets it, I think he can show out a little bit. So I like Shireman. I know people have talked about him being a potential Sam Hauser replacement, which I'm not really with that too much, but I see the vision. I like Shireman. I think he's gonna have to show a lot more in his second year, but I'm still kind of up in the air about how I feel about him.
Yeah, I think in the summer league, a lot of people's main concerns was that streaky shooting that we kind of saw. And you mentioned, I think we're going to see a little bit more of an expanded role this year. So I think we'll kind of get to the true testament of what that streakiness can be. And I think that will really identify what player he could be for the Boston Celtics. When they drafted him, I was very high just on it because the fact of the player I wanted. I knew they were going to lose Fima Hailuk. I knew that they weren't going to have him back, and I kind of wanted another scoring shooter just off the bench potentially for some offense. A guy that I mentioned was a guy in Joe Harris. He ended up retiring. Then they got Baylor Shireman, so I was like, okay, maybe this can be that little kind of tweener shooting guard, that younger version for the Boston Celtics here. Unfortunately, we have yet to see that full potential, but I do believe within this Boston Celtics unit, he's going to get that more experience. And even last year, I think it was in March or April, he started getting some more burn with the Boston Celtics into some some games, getting some minutes, like I think like 10 or 12 minutes per game. And he was holding his own pretty solidly as a playmaker. He has that hustle. We also remember that play from last year's Summer League where he dove into the bleachers trying to save that loose ball versus the Los Angeles Lakers. So I think he truly does have what the Celtics want to see in like the intrinsics of a player. He kind of fits the Celtics mold, the Celtics player, kind of what they like. But I do think we're going to have to see that shooting really step up for him to get that major role. And I think this season's going to be that true testing point. I feel like with a lot of these young guys, it's kind of just trying to see if they can hit to stick to kind of be those next Payton Pritchard, Luke Cornett, Sam Hauser, those depth role players that they can build up. Or will they be used as potential, guys they lose or potential trade options for the Celtics at the trade deadline or going into next season to kind of find those new role players.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Shireman, it's kind of interesting, especially right after he got drafted. Everyone was sort of trying to draw parallels to him and Hauser. And then even in the middle of the season, there was a lot of conversations. Is he eventually going to replace Hauser, etc.? But I think he's just such a different player than Hauser, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that's a bad thing. I'm super high in Baylor Shireman. We can get into that in a second, but I think just the type of player he is, he's a little bit different than Hauser. I don't think he's ever going to be a 40% shooter in this league. Maybe he will a couple seasons, but Hauser's a guy that's been 40% his entire career. I don't think Shireman's necessarily that, but I don't think that's a bad thing considering really how solid of a playmaker he is. He can be that sort of secondary ball handler if need be. Really good passer, very versatile passer as well. The hustle, like you guys mentioned, it's totally there. The defense overall isn't totally great, but solid, and he plays really hard on that end of the floor. And then he's a really good rebounder. Also, I think that's maybe a part of his game that we didn't get to see as much last year. But he has really solid size, good rebounding instincts, and then that's really connected to his hustle as well. Sort of a guy that can contribute in so many different facets, even if he's not going to be that 40+% 3-point shooter. If he can do that while shooting 37% from three, I think that's a super valuable player for this team. And yeah, I think he's just a totally different player than Hauser. I think he also likes to shoot off the dribble a lot more, and he does take a little bit more difficult shots than Hauser. Hauser sort of, his bread and butter is catch and shoot, and he's one of the best catch and shooters in the league. At the same time, I just think Shireman brings a bit of a different element, and yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something that surprised me watching him in the G League a lot, and then watching his time in Boston as well. During his rookie season, just how good of an all-around game he has. I knew that was discussed around the draft, but I don't think I fully realized that until getting to see him really in the G League a lot, and then as well in his limited opportunities with Boston, which we saw him sort of carve out a role towards the end of the season, and I was just super impressed. Yeah, I'm super high on him, and sort of like you were mentioning, Elie, he's a little bit on the older side, so I think we're gonna get to see him play a really significant role, and I think we're gonna see him sort of closer to his prime than some of these other guys. One thing before we move on to some of the other younger guys, I think just sort of drawing comparisons around the league. One name that I always sort of thought of was Luke Kennard, but recently I've sort of changed to think he really reminds me of Brandon Podzemski on the Warriors. Just a guy that can handle the ball if need be, that secondary creator, and then just the hustle, the rebounding. I think it's all there. Are there any other guys that he sort of reminds you of around the league?
I really like that the Luke Kennard one that you kind of made just there. I kind of similarly see that with Podziemski. I can also see that as well with his hustle and kind of being one of those like young intriguing pieces for one of those teams. I kind of said like Joe Harris kind of like earlier on, but I obviously don't really see that now. I feel like he kind of reminded me a little bit of Svi, but has a little bit more of a playmaking, not as much catch and shoot. But I like the comparisons that you made.
Same. Honestly, I don't really think I have anything too much to add. I think that's a good comparison for Shireman because he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. Obviously, his specialty is being a sharpshooter essentially, but I do kind of like that idea that he can do a little bit more than that. That's just what happens to be his bread and butter, and I think because of that, he has that versatility where he can still kind of make a little bit of an impact even if his shot isn't falling. But I guess obviously we're gonna have to see that at a bigger level next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan Walsh, Ugo, Josh Minot. Who do you guys feel most confident out of that group being able to contribute for the Celtics team?
I feel like it's Jordan Walsh, in my opinion. I feel like he proved at the Summer League this year he could be a very solid defender for this team, could also hit the three ball better than he did in his sophomore Summer League, which I think we all kind of expected this year three Summer League to be last year for Jordan Walsh. So I think that's kind of buying us in a little bit more. I just think within this rotation with Joe Mazzulla, he didn't really get that much love last year, but I do think with the opportunity with Jason Tatum being out and them kind of having a hole at this wing position with Hauser and Brown now going to be starting, but having no clear rotational wing off the bench, I think that Jordan Walsh, Minot, and Ugo will compete. But I think Walsh, with having his, I guess, seniority of being on the Celtics a little bit longer and being here a couple more seasons, I think he'll prove to be the front runner there. But I do have high expectations for both Josh Minot and for Ugo Gonzalez. Ugo, we saw in the Summer League be a little bit more of a playmaker and kind of more of a distributor. I think we're going to see him working more off ball with this Celtics team and with the actual Boston Celtics team. And I think that we're going to see a little bit more of a different game for Ugo Gonzalez, which I think is going to look a little bit more cleaner. I also think his mentality of how aggressive he is, I think, is going to really fit in well with Joe Mazzulla, and I think they're going to have a great connection. We saw that a little bit of that frustration coming out in the Summer League, and I think Joe Mazzulla is going to bring the best out of that for him. And then Josh Minot, I think, is one of the true flyers across the league that is really banking on himself. I know he did not go back to the Timberwolves and chose to enter free agency. The Celtics are giving him that opportunity. I feel like in a situation where Jordan Walsh and Ugo Gonzalez, two guys who clearly haven't set themselves apart to be clear rotational guys for a team, I think this is the perfect opportunity for him to kind of compete, bid with those guys, and maybe even get that opportunity to rise above them, similar to where we had O'Shea Brissett and Lamar Stevens just a couple seasons ago competing for that backup power forward spot. I think we're going to see something similar this year within this rotation.
Yeah, honestly, you kind of messed me up when you said this is supposed to be year three Jordan Walsh. It's true, but it doesn't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
I do like, again, I feel like I say this about a lot of guys, but I do like the idea of Jordan Walsh a lot. When he came out of the draft and when we got him, somebody I kind of compared him to, I don't really see it as much anymore, but I kind of compared him to like a Matisse Thybulle a little bit. And I it also bodes well for Jordan Walsh, I think, that he's still incredibly young. Like he still
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of room to grow. And kind of like you said, Bruce, his 3 point shots improved, which was already a weakness when the Celtics drafted him. But he's shown that he can kind of knock him down a little bit. I like what he has to offer on the surface. I like the idea of Jordan Walsh, and I'm definitely interested to see what he can do. I don't know if I would say I have the utmost confidence that he'll be able to kind of play like a O'Shea Brissett type of role or anything like that, but I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table. And I think Hugo Gonzalez is another really interesting one because I think it's pretty obvious he's very skilled. I don't know how much of his game is going to translate at the NBA level, but obviously him playing overseas and playing for one of the greatest basketball teams in the world, outside of the NBA, obviously also bodes well for him and what he can bring to the table. I think they have some intriguing prospects, kind of like Bruce was saying earlier, kind of intrigue, and intriguing is kind of what we should call basically the Celtics team. And I feel that same way about those two guys, and same with Josh Minot. I mean, maybe by default, I feel the most confident in him just because he has the most experience, kind of technically. But I think they all will be able to kind of show a little bit of what they bring to the table, and I think we'll be able to kind of see who can be that kind of long term contributor for when the Celtics are ready to compete again.
Yeah, absolutely. Bruce, I like that comparison you brought up with O'Shea Brissett and Lamar Stevens with the Minot and Walsh. I think that's a pretty good parallel there. I feel like they're very similar players. We're
Mm-hmm.
talented defenders, have sort of the tools to be really successful NBA wins. They just haven't really shown it yet, especially on offense. I think Minot shown a little bit more flashes. At the same time, I definitely think Walsh will get the edge over him at least to start. But if Walsh struggles again offensively, I could definitely see Minot sort of taking over that role. And I'm very intrigued to see what both of them do. Yeah, very just like I said, sort of similar players. I don't know with Walsh. I don't know how confident I am in him. Honestly, just we haven't seen much evidence that he's a NBA quality offensive player. I like Elie said, I love the idea of what he can be. It's just the shot has been really tough. He shot below 30% on a lot of really open threes. And I think it's tough for me to see that changing. The summer league was definitely a positive sign, but at the same time, for a guy entering his third season, I kind of expect that in summer league. But yeah, I mean, hopefully he can be a real contributor for this team. I definitely like the idea of him. I'd like to see them use him a little bit differently. I just don't think 3-point shooting is necessarily his strength. I also don't think he's a guy that can even be like a secondary playmaker or creator, but I think he's a really solid cutter, guy that you can sort of use off ball, closer to the rim a little bit more. I think he can be a solid finisher. So maybe if they use him a little in a little bit of a different way, I could see him working out a little bit and taking a big step up. But in Missoula's system, I think shooting's a real premium, and I think that's just something he's struggled with so much. It doesn't really give me a ton of confidence in him, but he is super young, like you guys mentioned. So I hope he proves me wrong, and I hope we can see a little bit more from him defensively. I think we saw solid flashes, but if he can really establish himself as even a higher level of defender to the point where you can't really keep him out of the rotation, especially with this team this year, that's something that could definitely change for him. But yeah, um, I think Ugo is the guy I would have the most confidence in right now, and maybe that's just because I haven't seen him at the NBA level. And he's the youngest; he has the most potential. First round pick. Walsh. I think that's the other thing we have to remember. Even though he was the only Celtics pick back in 2023, he was still a second round guy. So I think Ugo, real first round talent. I think even going back to like this time last year, I kind of try to keep tabs on the draft. He was sort of viewed as a lottery guy. Didn't play a ton on that really stacked team over in Spain, but at the same time, the skill set's just so exciting. At first, I was like, well, why didn't they take a center? And then as I learned a little bit more about Hugo, I was like, okay, I'm really excited about what this guy can bring to the table. And yeah, the defense and the intensity was totally there, and that's something that really excites me. And then just the secondary playmaking, I think that will be huge for a team that needs that. Sort of without Tatum and then losing Holiday, I think you just need another ball handler in there. So that's another thing that intrigues me, and we'll see how the shot goes. But he has shown some flashes. Definitely not his forte, but sort of a jack of all trades guy. Definitely someone I'm super excited to see. I could see him playing a little bit in the G League or not getting a ton of minutes early on, but eventually I think he'll carve out some sort of role, especially just with where the team's at this year. All right. I think we can sort of move on to some of the bigger names. I think one area, at least, I'm sure you guys will agree with me that I'm excited for the Celtics season is seeing Jaylen Brown as that true number one option, and that is something that definitely does give me a good bit of optimism with this team. I think he's going to have a really stellar season. I think we've seen time and again his averages go up significantly, and he looks like a different player. He almost always he really takes a step up when Tatum's been out of the lineup, and I think that will be huge for this team. And I do think he has all the makings of a first option. But yeah, what do you guys sort of expecting from Brown this season, and how confident are you in him?
You are talking to the president of the Jaylen Brown fan club. I love Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown, I actually, after he won Finals MVP, I actually gave him the title. He's now officially my favorite NBA player of all time, overtaking Paul Pierce, because Jaylen Brown's a guy like even when we drafted him, like I loved the pick. Going into that draft, I wanted Jaylen Brown. When everybody knew Ben Simmons was going one and Brandon Ingram was going two, people didn't know who the Celtics were going to take. I wanted Jaylen Brown. I'm very high on his game. I do obviously think he has flaws. I don't think that's a ridiculous thing to say. I'm I'm very high on what Jaylen Brown can do this year. I think the one thing that Celtics fans need to kind of understand is he's not going to be Jason Tatum. There are so many things that Jason Tatum can do that Jaylen Brown can't, but that also kind of goes the other way as well. And so I'm really interested to see how Jaylen Brown does. And I forget what the context was, but I remember John Corrales of the Locked On Celtics podcast. I listened to an episode and he brought up a very good point. This is essentially going to be Jaylen Brown's only chance to be the number one guy during his prime. And I just have a feeling that's not lost on Jaylen Brown. Like this is going to be a great opportunity for him to show the world what he can do as the number one guy, because he's almost 30. It's kind of crazy to say, but he is almost 30 now, and he's not going to have many, if any, other opportunities to show that he's the number one guy. Obviously, I think the Celtics are going to take a step back with him, not so much with him necessarily being the number one guy, but in a weird way, not having a Jaylen Brown replacement for Jaylen Brown. Like, who's going to step up in the Jaylen Brown role? That's the part that I'm really interested to see. But individually, I think Jaylen Brown's going to have a really good year. I don't think it's going to be MVP caliber or anything like that, but I think he's going to be able to show the world what he can do as the number one guy. And I'm really intrigued. We'll stick with intrigued. I'm really intrigued to.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I'm very, very excited to see Jaylen Brown step up as this number one option this year, and I think he's going to dominate for the Boston Celtics. We've seen times where even in the playoffs where the Celtics have catered to playing to Jaylen Brown's play style. I think we're going to see the Celtics do that a little bit more this season, focusing on tacking to the rim, focusing more on those kickouts and doing that. And I'm really excited to see that. Brown, I have a stat pulled up, last year averaged 4.5 assists per game last season, but his career is only 2.6. And I remember last year his assist numbers just completely jumping. I think we're going to see that this year as well. I talked about this on Celtics Digest with my co-host Patrick the other day, but we were saying that Jaylen Brown, with Jason Tatum being out, he's going to be getting more rebounds too. He's going to be getting more assists. He's going to be more of that focal kind of like point forward for this offense, and I'm really excited to see what he can do within those limits. Obviously, I do think it's going to be a little bit harder for him to prioritize being that main offensive contributor and that main defensive contributor. We may see some lapses there where he does have to focus more on one end to where he isn't giving it his all because Jason Tatum isn't there, but I do think we're going to see Jaylen Brown being a number one option prove that he could be that number one option. And depending on how this kind of really goes for Jaylen Brown, this could be one of his career seasons that he looks back on in his prime and says, even if I didn't have the best season or the best record, I'm very happy for this season. And I think motivated on and off the court, we've already seen that within this style with him as a Boston Celtic. So I'm very excited to see how hungry he comes out on the court as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad we're all kind of part of the Jaylen Brown fan club over here. Definitely one of the most just overhated players in the NBA, in my opinion, and even by some portions of the Celtics fan base, which is just truly awful to me. But I'm super excited to see Brown play this season. And yeah, Bruce, I'm happy you brought up the assist numbers. That was something I was going to say. That makes me even more confident. I've always sort of been confident in Brown as a potential first option. Obviously, never wanted to see it because that would have meant him going somewhere else or Tatum getting injured. But at the same time, I've always sort of been intrigued to see that. And I've always been confident in the idea of him being that first option. I think we've seen it really in the two times the Celtics have made the finals. Obviously, he won Finals MVP, but in 2022, he was their best player in the finals as well. And that's just something I can't ignore. And I mean, the playmaking growth that he's had over these last couple of years, especially last year, I thought that was by far his best season as a playmaker. He had, like you said, career high in assists, and he cut back on his turnovers a lot. That makes me just even more confident in Jaylen Brown. And if the Celtics have a surprising season where they sort of exceed expectations, I think it will be because of Jaylen Brown. And I think that's really what gives me the most hope with this team is just JB, and I'm expecting an all NBA caliber season from him. But yeah, I think we can move on to Payton Pritchard and Derrick White, two of the other really consistent players and bigger names on this team. Do you guys think we could see them reach another level? Potentially, I mean, this might sound a little bit far fetched, but potentially even reach that sort of like all-star level. Yeah, what are you guys expecting from those two this season?
I feel like Derrick White is kind of the one that's more up in the air because I think we all love Derrick White. Derrick White's incredible, but I mean, I feel like essentially he's going to be the second in command to Jaylen Brown. And that will obviously be good when it comes to giving him an expanded role, and he'll have more of an opportunity to kind of, I guess, show what he can do. But I am willing to say he could play to that all-star level. I mean, I think you could say he already kind of has. He just hasn't really been given that title yet. But I will be interested to see how Derrick White can do as the second option because he's never been a second option in the NBA before. But we know what Derrick White's capable of on both sides of the ball. And I think for that reason, I do have a lot of confidence that he'll be able to step up and obviously make shots when needed. I mean, just because of the opportunities he's going to get, I mean, I'm not going to predict it, but I do think there's a world that exists where he is close to a 20-point per game score. I don't know if I would confidently say he will be, but just based on sheer volume he's going to be getting, I think he could be in line for a season like that. And then for Payton Pritchard, I do expect a big year from Payton Pritchard, whether he is going to be the starter or whether he's going to be coming off the bench. I know that's kind of a debate among Celtics fans. I think either way, I mean, he's proven that he can step up when needed. The one thing I will say about Payton Pritchard is that obviously he's had exceptions, but I feel like he's a player that kind of gets exposed the more he plays. Like the bigger opportunities he gets, the more you kind of see why he doesn't play too much. And with him essentially being in line for probably the biggest role of his career that he'll ever have, because he's going to be not only tasked with taking on a much bigger load offensively, but he's also going to be tasked with essentially replacing Drew Holiday. I mean, I think, again, based off the sheer volume, he should be in line for a career year, but I think his efficiency might take a hit. I think he won't be able to be Payton Pritchard. Like, he won't necessarily be that energetic, that spark plug, that type of guy, because he's going to have a much bigger role on the offense. So I think he could be in line for like I said, the best year of his career, but I don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to make as big of a leap as I think a lot of people might think.
I'm definitely excited for both of these players to kind of get a little bit more exposure. Elie, I think you hit it perfectly. Derrick White has kind of been this all-star player in Celtics fans' eyes, kind of even dating back to 2 seasons ago when Reggie Miller's had him on his all-star ballot, and we were all like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But unfortunately, it didn't happen because they don't value two-way basketball. But I think Derrick White, like you mentioned, as a second option, we're going to see like the true best version of Derrick White, because I think as a third option, he's very complimentary and it allows him to really focus. If he needs to hit those 3-point shots to come up clutch in the fourth quarter, if he's hot, he can. If he needs to get that nice little block at the end of the game to help on the defensive end, he can. And I'm excited to see where that really does take him this year. I do think he'll look a lot better, but I do think that maybe with more shot attempts or more stuff like that, his stats won't look as great as they have in the past, which people might be like, well, Derrick White's not this really like solid great guy, but I like next step guy, but I do think that a lot of people will value his accommodations that he brings for the Boston Celtics. When looking at Payton Pritchard, though, I do think we will see a little bit of a rise in his game. Every year he's kind of come into the NBA, he's gotten a little bit better at something. Like starting off, he was just a catch and shoot guy. Occasionally would step out of bounds because his sidestep was too wide and stuff like that. He got more comfortable with that. Then he started working the pick and roll and started getting more comfortable running the offense. Then we now have seen him go, from getting offensive rebounds to attacking the basket. A couple years ago, he was known for hitting those half-court shots. Last year, he rose to the sixth man of the year. I still think we will see a rise in Payton Pritchard's game. I think, obviously, he's not going to be replicative of Drew Holiday on that defensive end or kind of be able to be that type of defender, but I do think we will see him kind of rise and kind of develop on that defensive side with having that. And I think every year he's added something to his game, and I think this year we're going to see that. I don't know what it is. I think it's going to be on that defensive side, but I think we're going to see a little bit more hungry at Payton Pritchard, and I could see him getting close to being a very prolific, number 3 offensive scorer for this Celtics team, right behind Jaylen Brown and Derrick White.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree with both those points there. I think with both of them, we'll see increase in scoring. I think it's just sort of natural, but at the same time, the efficiency might take a bit of a step back. But yeah, I mean, I think if the Celtics are exceeding expectations around the All Star break, maybe they're even top 5, 6 seed, and White's putting up 18, 19 a game, I think he could be in that All Star conversation. I wouldn't rule it out. At the same time, I do think there's going to be a little bit of growing pains for both of these guys. I do think just playing off of a superstar in Jason Tatum and the gravity that he brings to the table can't be ignored, and really stepping into those bigger roles without Drew as well. I think there could be some growing pains there. But once the season really gets rolling, I am confident that both of these guys will have really strong years and have potentially career years, especially from a numbers standpoint. And I think Elie, you brought it up. Pritchard has struggled against some of the better teams. I do think having two of those same types of players, in him and Simons, will benefit the Celtics in that regard, because maybe if one of them's struggling against a better team, the other guy can sort of pick it up and play a similar role. So I do think that's sort of an advantage that Simons does bring to this team. But yeah, I am pretty confident in both of these guys. And yeah, like you said, Bruce, Pritchard's always been a guy who can add more to his game, and he's just constantly improving. I think the next step for him might be adding a little bit more playmaking. We saw his numbers as a starter; it was kind of limited, but his assist numbers went up by a good amount, and I think that's something we could see with him this year, potentially being that full-time starter. But yeah, I think that's sort of a nice transition to who our breakout player is for this team. Who are you guys looking at to have really that breakout kind of season?
Like I mean, I feel like the best answer for me is Amish Kata, just by default almost, because he's going to have the biggest jump in his role. And like I kind of said before, I'm a very big fan of Namias Keita. Uh, yeah, I guess that's just my pick. I really like Namias Keita a lot. I think he's somebody that will really benefit from having a bigger role, especially specifically next year, where the expectations, regardless of what maybe some in the circle will say, some in the Celtics circle will say, the expectations aren't going to be as high next year. They're not going to be competing for a championship. They might not even be competing for a playoff spot. They might be a play-in team or whatever it might be. So I actually really like what the idea of what Neemias Queta can bring, kind of like I was saying earlier, on an expanded role. So I feel like Neemias Queta is my pick for that reason. Like I said, I don't think he's going to be the next Shaquille O'Neal or anything like that, but there's a lot to like about his game, and I think to be able to let him kind of develop that throughout the year with a bigger opportunity, I think makes him a prime breakout candidate. Kind of like you were saying earlier, it is he is at a disadvantage for being 26, and still there's a question of whether he's a real NBA player or not. But I think at the same time he's only 26. He still has a couple years to really figure this out. Whether the Celtics will give him that or not is different, but next year specifically, I like the idea that he can kind of be their next breakout candidate and really establish himself as a long-term asset to the team.
I really like Neemias Queta. I like that pick. I'll go a little bit different though. I was thinking of some, Jaylen Brown, Derrick White, Payton Pritchard, the guys we just talked about, but I want to go a little bit out of the box. So maybe not as out of the box, but I'm going to go Sam Hauser with my kind of breakout player for this year. I see a stat from Todd Whitehead, courtesy of Sports Radar, where the most feared shooters in the NBA. Sam Hauser is on top of that leaders, where he's had 291 closeouts, shot 42%, and it basically says that a lot of players have to get that extra speed to stop a guy in Sam Hauser. And I think this season, specifically with Jason Tatum being out, the uncertainty of who's going to provide this three-point offensive kind of spark, a guy in Sam Hauser I think is really going to take that step and take that leap. In the championship year, I think it was in like the first half or like the first month, he was like the best three-point shooter across the entire NBA. And I know last year he dealt with some back issues, had some, things hindering his shot or ability to do that. But I think this year, potentially even in a lineup where he is starting with this Boston Celtics team, I think he's going to be a very viable option for this three-point unit, and I think he's going to be someone that a lot of people are going to kind of forget about on this starting lineup or maybe in these depth pieces. So I think a guy in Sam Hauser who, has a little bit of a polarizing kind of stance in the Celtics kind of space within the fans, I think is going to prove a lot of those haters wrong, not only the offensive end, but also on the defensive end, where a lot of people think he can get exposed or attacked, which he has in the past, but mostly can hold his own on some aspects, and I think we're going to see that rise for both ends of the court for Sam Hauser this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are two great picks. I mean, with Queta, he's bound to have a bigger role, and I think that's going to sort of lend him to a lot bigger numbers, and we're going to really see what he has. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And then with Hauser, I'm really intrigued to see what he can do. He's obviously, like we've talked about, just such a deadly outside shooter, but I wonder if he can even develop a little bit more on-ball stuff, and we can see a little bit more of that of his game. I think he's bound to have a scoring leap just with the absence of Tatum, and I'm definitely penciling him in as that sort of starting power forward, and I'm very optimistic to see what he can do this year. And yeah, that was a great stat that you brought up there, Bruce, about the most feared shooters. That was a really interesting one. Yeah, Todd Whitehead had some great stuff. For my breakout player, I'm going to go with my guy, Baylor Shireman. In terms of a confidence level, scale from 1 to 10, I would say I'm a 10 out of 10 with Shireman. I'm just super bullish on him. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but yeah, I'm super bullish on what he can provide. Really, from an all-around standpoint, I think the shooting's going to be big this year, but I also just think what he can do as a secondary ball handler on a team that really does need a little bit more ball handling, a little bit more creation. I think that's going to be huge. Rebounding, I think, is an aspect of his game that's a little bit underrated, and also an aspect of the void that Tatum's leaving behind. I think that goes a little bit under discussed. So I think he can provide that a little bit too, and then just the hustle, the defense. I think it's going to be all there. He's shown enough flashes to where I'm confident that he's going to really be able to take that leap, and he's also old enough and he's really seasoned enough to make that leap. So yeah, I'm very confident in Shireman. Maybe a little too bullish, but I think he's going to have a really, really solid season, sort of similar to what we saw from, I mentioned him before, but Brandon Podzimski. I think he could sort of have similar numbers to him, similar role with the Celtics team. And I do think once Tatum returns, there's room for both him and Hauser to really coexist and really thrive with the score. I think this will be the season where Shireman establishes himself as not just a nice, intriguing young player, but a key part of the core once Tatum returns.
Like that, yeah. I'm not as sold on Sharman, but I like how we all have different people that we're all very confident in with this intriguing season, and I think that's kind of what we have to really evaluate with the Boston Celtics is kind of just who's really going to stick and stand out. And I feel like with them having so many options, that the possibilities are very limitless for the team.
I think we can, before we get into the over under, I just want to get your guys' sort of perspective on this sort of tanking versus competing conversation. Do you guys see, what do you guys think is the value of sort of trying to maybe bottom out in draft position? Or do you guys sort of think there's real value in really competing for that playoff spot and giving these guys some more experience? Where do you guys land on that end of the debate? I know a lot of Celtics fans are like, screw it, let's just tank this season. Let's try to get AJ DeBansta. Let's try to get Darren Peterson, whoever. But yeah, where do you guys sort of land on that debate?
I hate playing devil's advocate, but I genuinely understand both sides of the argument because the tanking side, if you're not going to win a championship and you're not really going to be in a comfortable playoff position, then tanking, especially for next year's draft class, which looks to be very, very, very loaded, I think that makes sense. You want as high of a draft pick as possible. That way you can get a really good player to pair with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derrick White, and whoever else you keep for the long run. But on the flip side, I also really like the idea of if they can making another some small playoff run so that they can get some more experience with for some of their younger guys. Obviously, Baylor Shireman, Manish Keita, like I was saying, and guys like that who maybe either weren't a big part of that championship team from last year or maybe just weren't even on the team at all. I think giving them that type of playoff experience can pay dividends for the long run. More on the side of just compete because I honestly don't think even if you tank, I don't think the Celtics team is going to be bad enough to be a bottom three, bottom five team in the league. And so I'm just kind of a believer in just go out there, show, let's see what everybody can do in their new roles, see who kind of works out in the long run and who could be a good fit for when Tatum comes back. So I guess I'm more on the compete and try to make some noise in the playoffs, but I do understand the other side of it.
Yeah, I definitely understand both sides, but like you said, Elie, I don't think that they're going to be bad enough to where they're going to get a good enough pick. And I know you could say like, oh, well, look at the Mavericks last year; they jumped all the way up to one, but like that could be said about any lottery, and the Celtics could get screwed, right? The Celtics could tank enough to get the seventh overall pick and then get the 14th. So like, you know what I mean? I don't think that's worth the risk. I also don't think like Joe Mazzulla himself or, Jaylen Brown, Payton Pritchard, all these guys want to tank. Like, they want to compete. They still want to be a top team in the Eastern Conference and kind of prove, like we've kind of talked about with Jaylen Brown being this number one option. Like, hey, if we can make the playoffs and maybe win a couple games, maybe even win a series, that just proves to everyone that they kind of us out when we were kind of underdogs in the situation where they've been so heavy favorites these last couple seasons. So I can't argue to the fans that want them to tank for with the season because there's no high expectations, but I also can't, say like just completely chalk it up and do nothing. So I'm going to lean on the compete side because I want to see this Boston Celtics do good, represent good, and have, I guess, like the best value for their players, not only for now, but for the future as well.
I actually want to, I think, Bruce, you brought up a really good point. There are so many, like Joe Mazzulla, Jaylen Brown, they don't want to tank because they all have so much to prove. Like
Mm-hmm.
Joe Mazzulla has to, whether it's fair or not, Joe Mazzulla has to prove that he is actually a good coach and can kind of make adjustments for on a team that's not loaded. Jaylen Brown has to prove that he can be a number one option. Derrick White, on a similar note, has to prove that he could be a number two option. He can make that leap and kind of be more than just a complementary piece, kind of like Bruce, what you were saying a little bit earlier. And so this Celtics team has so many guys who have to kind of they have a chip on their shoulder. They have to kind of prove what they are capable of. And I do think for that reason as well, they're not going to want to tank. And I think as fans, we should be able to support that so that they can kind of show maybe, gain some confidence and kind of show what they can do for the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely lean heavily on the compete side. Frankly, I think tanking's fucking stupid. I think it just sets up a
Mm-hmm.
losing culture. I mean, for this team, it's not as severe, but I hate it in general. I think it's stupid. And I do think, like you said, Bruce, I mean, and Ely talked about as well, I mean, these guys aren't built to tank. Joe Mazzulla is not a guy who's going to say, all right, let's just roll it out with all our young guys. He hates that. He's
Yeah.
never going to do that. I just don't see it. I don't see Brown either. I don't Pritchard, White, any of these guys. I just don't see it. And I do think there is real value, even if you don't get as good of a pick, of being a playoff team, even if it's a first round exit. I think there's true value of showing these guys what it's like to be in a situation. Payton Pritchard, well, he has been an important part of this team, including the 2024 championship team. He's never played a role like this. And I think the role he's going to play when Tatum returns is going to be a lot closer to what he's going to be playing this year. So I think showing him that playoff experience in that role will be vital. Similar thing for Simons. He's really never been a part of a real playoff team. I think he made the playoffs a couple times with the Blazers, but he was super young. He didn't play a whole lot. So I think putting him into that situation will be valuable. Jaylen Brown, I don't think there's as much value there because he has shown to be a number one option at times in playoff settings, but I still do think there's some level of value. Kada especially, I mean, he never really played too much in the playoffs, so maybe he's not going to be the starting center in 2026, 27 when Tatum's back, but he's going to be a bigger part of the rotation, and I think proving that in a playoff setting would be massive. And I think playoff basketball is just so different when you have the chance to really game plan against guys and game plan for guys. I think it's just such a different beast, and I think there's a lot of experience, a lot of value in giving those guys that experience of not just playing in the playoffs, but playing a different role in the playoffs. Because, yeah, this team does have a lot of playoff experience, but these guys, it's just totally different given the roles they're playing. So I think I see it as very valuable, even if maybe the ceiling is you get to the second round. I do see there being significant value personally. And yeah, I mean, like you guys talked about also the draft, it's never really a certainty. We saw teams like the Wizards and the Jazz, even if the Celtics tried, I don't think they'd be that bad, but they tanked the entire season and they fell out of the top three. Yeah, I mean, I don't see that much of a difference picking at 16 versus 6 personally. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. I pretty anti-tanking. I mean, I think if there is a scenario where the Celtics do lean into the tank, but it would have to be some serious injuries arise, whether that's to Brown or White, whoever. Obviously, you don't hope for that, but I do think that does have to be accounted for. That's sort of the only scenario where I see this team maybe even leaning into the tank a little.
I agree with that.
All right, we can get into the over-unders here. Celtics line is set at 42.5. Are you guys feeling the over-under there? And then sort of in general, where do you see this team stacking up in the East?
42 wins is actually kind of a fair assessment. I guess I'm going to say the over just because I almost feel like with them having as low of expectations as they do, it could also put them in a really good position to kind of show out a little bit and I guess, shock the world a little bit. So I'm going to go with the over, but just barely. I don't think they're going to be a top 5 seed or anything like that, even on their best day. I don't think they're going to be a top 5 seed. I definitely think they'll at least make the postseason, whether that's as the top 6 seed in the playoffs or whether that's as a play-in team. We'll have to see. But I just think with how wide open this Eastern Conference is, while there is a world where they can kind of make some magic happen, I also just think there are so many other teams that are going to be better than them. Obviously, I think Cleveland will be better than them. I think New York will be better than them. I mean, I still think obviously Milwaukee will be better than them. I think Detroit will be better than them. I think Atlanta will be better than them, and I'm sure I'm missing some teams off the top of my head. So I do think they'll at least be a play-in team, but I don't think they're going to be any worse, and I don't think they're going to be any better.
Yeah, I'll go with the over as well. From looking at the standings last year, the Pistons at 6 had 44 wins, and then the Magic at 7th had 41. I feel like they kind of fall into that 6 to 8 range kind of for the season here. So, and with them winning 61 games last year, even though they did lose so many key players, I don't see that dropping off too drastically, specifically with how wide open the Eastern Conference is also, with teams kind of being very relative in kind of standings. I could see the Celtics maybe being an underdog in a matchup versus a Magic or versus a New York Knicks, but sneaking out that victory in said contest just because Jaylen Brown completely went off, or Payton Pritchard erupted for 25 points, or who knows, maybe Jordan Walsh hit 6 threes and the Celtics magically won a game. I feel like that can kind of happen this season with how much depth they really do have. So I'm definitely going to go with the over, and then kind of in placing of the divisions in the conference, I'd say roughly between 6 and 8. I feel like them and the Pacers, the other team that we'll be talking about a little bit later, are kind of similar in that position, which I think is very intriguing.
Yeah, I could maybe see them hitting the over, but I'm gonna have to go with the under here. I think it's a little bit of a high line, just sort of where my expectations are at. I mean, I don't think it's insane to expect that they'll go over, but I don't see them winning 43 games. Even if they hit 42, that's technically the under. I see them right around that 500 range, 40, 41, maybe even like high 30s. I mean, last year we saw that the Heat make the playoffs, winning 37 games, and then behind them, the Hawks won 40 games. I mean, obviously the play-in's a big factor. I do see the Celtics as one of these play-in teams. I just can't get behind the defense. I think that's my main concern, and hopefully they exceed my expectations. I'm confident in certain aspects of this season, as we discussed, and I definitely think it's worth competing, but I think they'll be a play-in team. Right now, I sort of have them penciled in as that 8 seed, but that could change, maybe go up to the 7 seed. I don't think they're going to crack that top 6. Yeah, I think like you guys said, Cavs, Knicks, Magic, Pistons, Hawks, Bucks. I think I see the Celtics just in a tier below with the Pacers, as we'll discuss in a second. But yeah, with sort of the Pacers, Heat, Raptors, I think are just a really weird team. So who knows? I think the Raptors could be a sort of a factor in this Eastern Conference. But yeah, I see them right now penciled in as a 8 seed.